Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here today. I want to first start by thanking Shay Brown for hosting this amazing event. So excited to be here, and I'm really honored to be part of the team delivering this wonderful summit to all of you attendees. I also want to thank Shay's team in the background because they're doing a lot of work to make sure that everything is happening on time, that all the speakers are coordinated and everything. So I really want to send out a shout out to Shay's team in the background. I also want to send a shout out to my team, Melanie McSally, Farhana Cannon, and Angel Tussie. You guys are just amazing at making me better, making me a better person, a better executive, and just really helping to make Venn Negotiation a success. But I also want to say thank you so much to all of you attendees. You are gracing me and Shay with the most valuable thing that you have available, and that is your time. And so I am very honored by that, and thank you so much. So I'm really excited, though, that you're here because I love this topic that we're going to be talking about, and in case you couldn't tell. So today we're going to talk about renegotiation, and in this day, with all the things that are going on in the market and in the world, the topic of renegotiation could not be more timely. So we're going to talk about what renegotiation is and how it's different from negotiation. But more importantly, we're going to talk about how to renegotiate. How do you approach a renegotiation? What are the steps that are involved? How do you know that you're being successful? And so I just want to start by asking you a few short questions. So, since I can't see you, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand or write down what it is that you think, what the answer is to each of these questions. They're really easy, I promise. Are you ready? Are you ready? All right, let's go. Who here has ever negotiated? Yes, all of us have negotiated. Exactly. Who here has won at a negotiation and got something that you wanted? You wanted it, you asked for it, and you got it. Yes, all of us have won at a negotiation. And who here has lost a negotiation? We wanted something, we didn't get it, we didn't even get what we needed out of the deal. We may have even had to walk away. Who's lost in a negotiation? Exactly. You have. All of us have. We've all been in negotiations. We are in negotiation almost every single day of different types. And we have all won negotiations, and we have all lost negotiation. But the topic of renegotiation is particularly interesting because even when we win, we may sometimes need to renegotiate a deal because a win that was a win 3 years ago, 5 years ago, last year, last week, may not continue to be a win for us, and we may need to go back to our counterpart and try to get a different deal. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is how we do that renegotiation process. So if it's okay, and you really actually can't tell me if it's okay or not, but let me tell you, so I'm just going to take the liberty and I'm going to tell you a little bit of my story. So I started when I was 19 as an unwed, pregnant teenager living out of the back of my 1972 Chrysler Newport with my black cat Athena. And I met a guy who thought he needed to rescue somebody. I thought I needed to be rescued. So we got married. And he adopted my daughter, and which sounds great, but he turned out not to be quite the nice guy that I thought he was. And I also turned out that I didn't really like being rescued quite so much. But we had 2 more kids, and I had 3 kids at the age of 22. We were incredibly poor. We were on welfare. We were buying our groceries at the local food bank. And we were living in Western Massachusetts at the time, where it gets cold and snowy, and we couldn't even keep heat in the house. So we would huddle under blankets in the winter to stay warm, and we'd do something you should never do, which was turn on the gas stove in order to heat up the house so that we had some kind of heat in the house. We boiled water on the stove so the girls could take baths. And it was just a crummy way to live. There was no getting around it. It was just not what I wanted in my life. And when I was in high school, I had grand dreams of being an executive. And I hadn't really let that go, even though I thought that I was not capable of making good decisions for myself, which is why I had abdicated my decision-making responsibility to my first husband after I got pregnant. Because clearly, I mean, heck, at 19, if I'm pregnant, there's no way that I am qualified to make my own decisions. But as I got older and I started living more of my life and raising my kids, I started to realize that I didn't want to live that life. That was not the life I wanted. I didn't want my daughters to live that life. I wanted something more. I wanted something different. So I decided to make a new life for myself. I renegotiated with myself. So I went to community college. And in my first year, I got a 4.0 GPA, and I got a full ride scholarship offer to attend Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in upstate New York, which is across the mountains from Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where I was living. And I could only study from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. because I wasn't allowed to study when my daughters were awake or when my husband was awake. And so again, because he didn't believe that women should be educated. Education was not something that a woman should be worried about when all she's supposed to be doing is being home, pregnant, taking care of kids, and having food on the table. So that was kind of the mentality that he was in at the time. And so when I got the scholarship, I went to campus one day, and it was for orientation or registration. I can't remember exactly which, but I remember I was there by myself and I looked around and I said, this is going to be a lot easier on my own than it is with him. And so I went home and I told him that I was leaving and that I was taking my daughters, and the girls and I were moving to New York, to upstate New York, so that I could go to school. And I did. And I became the first woman to graduate from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute as both a full-time student and a single mom. And the school was phenomenal. They scrambled so that we could get into student housing, and it was amazing. It was a great experience. It was hard. It was crazy, the things that we did, that my daughters, especially my oldest daughter, had to do so that I could be in school, so that the things that I did so that I could be in school, how I got daycare was crazy. And I mean, it was just a crazy time. But I also had the opportunity to meet this guy who ended up being the man of my dreams. And we just celebrated our 27th wedding anniversary. And, it ended up, all this trauma and all this stuff ended up being a phenomenal thing for me to go through, because it was really preparing me for the rest of what I was going to be doing. I graduated from Rensselaer and I got a position at what was then Bell Atlantic and now is Verizon. My husband and I married, and I started working at Bell Atlantic and started in marketing, but I didn't like it so much. And an opportunity came across my desk. And my husband, Keith, was like, you have got to do this. And it was a position in Bell Atlantic International, doing international finance in international mergers and acquisitions. And you were supposed to have an MBA. At least that's what the job description said. But I didn't have an MBA, but I didn't care. So I found a little tiny crack in the door, and then I made the door open really wide for me, and I ended up getting to work in international mergers and acquisitions. The first time that I flew from Washington, D.C. to Jakarta, Indonesia, I flew first class on Singapore Air, and I cried most of the flight because I couldn't stop thinking about how far I had come from living in the back of my car to being on that plane in first class on Singapore Air, which was the #1 airline in that year. So I worked in that job for a while, and then I'd always known that if I was going to advance, I needed to get an MBA. So there was only one school that everybody in the world knew. Everybody, didn't matter who I was talking to, what part of where they sat in life, what they did, didn't matter. Everybody knew this one school. So it was the only school that I was going to be willing, that I decided I was willing to move, to pull my daughters out of their school in order for me to go. And so to this date, the proudest day of my life is the day that my daughters walked across stage in front of me and got little teddy bears that had the university name on them right before I got my MBA from Harvard University. So yet again, another really far road to go from living in the back of my car. But it was all about renegotiating with myself. And that once I graduated from HBS, as we call Harvard Business School, I started working for a large consulting firm and ended up, I've worked with, really negotiated with, almost half the Fortune 500 in 53 countries. But I'm from a tiny town in Montana, and my parents are school bus drivers. And they have small business. They've had small businesses for most of the time I can remember. And I just got so frustrated watching how large corporations often take advantage of small businesses, whether they're customers or they're suppliers. And so I was like, it was frustrating to me. And I looked out and I was like, in a corporation, everybody is a specialist, but in a small business, everybody is a generalist. And information is power in a negotiation. And if you are a specialist, you by definition have more information. So I started Venn Negotiation out of a passion for leveling the playing field for small businesses and entrepreneurs to help them become even more successful in their negotiations by teaching them how to ask for more and then teaching them tools and techniques to negotiate for it. But part of that is really about renegotiation. So those moments when we've entered into an agreement and it's just not working for us and we're losing money on it, or we're in trouble financially and we can't meet our obligations. And there's just all these things that can cause a reason, be a reason for needing to renegotiate, which we're going to talk about. But let me ask you a question. Do you think you deserve more in your negotiations? If so, raise your hand. I know I often have thought that I've deserved more in my negotiation. So repeat after me. I deserve more. Right. I deserve more, and so do you. So let's talk about renegotiation. What is renegotiation and how do you go about doing it? So very quickly, renegotiation has some differences from general negotiation. So negotiation is when you have two parties who want something from the other. And in the process of that wanting, they reach some type of agreement that they each get part of what they want, or not usually all of what they want, but at least part of what they want. And in that process, it's like you don't have perfect information. So you're kind of guessing, you're trying to figure things out, and you have a lot of hypotheses and assumptions, and you're trying to figure out the people because you don't know them. But in a renegotiation, you have all that information. You have information parity, in other words, equal amounts of information roughly, because you know how much product or service you're buying, you know if you've paid for it, you know if it's any good, you know if something's not good, you know what customer service is like, you know how problems are resolved, and more importantly, you know the people. And that's huge, because in a renegotiation, sometimes the emotions can run high, because the biggest difference between negotiating and renegotiating is in negotiating, all parties have some level of mutual benefit. But in a renegotiation, just because a deal is not working for you does not mean it's not working for your counterpart. So you have to figure out how to create an incentive for your counterpart to actually negotiate or renegotiate. So how do you do that? So the thing is that in business, right, we have contracts. Now, contracts can be informal, meaning a handshake written on the back of a napkin. They can be notes in an email, or they can be formal, meaning that they're terms that are attached to a sales order or purchase order, or they are terms that have been actually drafted by an attorney. Those are formal. Those are formal types of contracts. But whether they're informal or not, we have contracts in all aspects of our business. And the thing is about contracts is that contracts are risk mitigation tools. They are simply a guidepost to tell us what it is that we've agreed to do, what our counterparts have agreed to do, and then to make sure that we're using those guideposts to make sure that we get what our counterparts said they were going to give, and that our counterpart gets what we said we were going to give. So the thing is about contracts, many small business owners they freak out when we start talking about contracts. But the reality is that contracts are what embody all of the elements that drive the need to renegotiate. And since contracts are risk mitigation tools, the things that trigger the need for renegotiation typically fall along these 5 major risk elements that are all covered in contracts. Again, formal or informal. So let's talk about what those 5 triggers are, those 5 things that can drive the need to renegotiate, because you want to pick one of those things, one of those drivers. So the first one is cash flow. So you've got payment terms, and you might have a situation where you're short on cash and you need to make cash flow. And so I had a client once they were a product merchandising company. They manufactured, or they did printing on coffee mugs and tote bags and all those kind of things. And their market at the time, this was in the early 2000s, their primary market was in the .com world with tech companies, and that market was shrinking because the bubble had burst. But so their revenue was drying up. But they had one customer that was a massive company, and that company was taking 180 days to pay their invoice. If they could just bring that payment cycle and shorten it, then they were going to be able to stay afloat. But if they couldn't shorten that payment cycle for that one very large customer, then they were probably going to go out of business. So the need to have cash flow accelerated was a driver for what we needed to do to renegotiate the contract. And we were able to do that by restructuring delivery and doing a few other things, but really focusing on this need to accelerate cash flow in order to continue to maintain that relationship. The second factor, the second rationale, is profitability. Now, this example may sound like it is cash flow, but it's not, because there's a huge distinction. So this was a small software company that owed over $1 million to its hosting provider, and they didn't have the money, hence the reason why it could be cash flow. Their customer base was drying up. Again, this was during the .com era, and it was a small company. I think they had about 20 people at the time. And the thing is that they couldn't pay it, but the CEO he had a long view. He was very much taking a strategic perspective on the company, and he wanted to be able to secure additional funding. So in order to secure additional funding, though, he had to show profitability. It was much more important for him to show that he was moving toward profitability than the cash flow. Because if he couldn't figure out the profitability, he wasn't going to be able to be around in the long run anyway. So then cash flow becomes kind of a shorter term issue from his perspective. So with that supplier, we completely restructured that relationship. We changed the product mix. We did operational changes internally to figure out to use the products in a completely different way. We extended the term of the contract, so we had a longer relationship with the supplier, and we were able to reduce that liability by 73%. That's right, 73%. 100% because we found all these other areas that were of value to the supplier so that we were able to figure out how to make that work. So you've got cash flow and you've got profitability. Next, you have operations. So I have a client and a friend who owns a machine shop, and his company, he has 12 employees, and his company manufactures parts for the aerospace defense industry. Companies like Lockheed, Raytheon, Boeing, NASA are some of his customers. And one of those behemoth customers came to him one day, not long ago, and said, we want to buy this much of this part. And that's okay, but we're only going to guarantee 5% of it. And you have to be willing to expedite 50% of it at no additional cost. Well, how in the heck is he going to do that, right? If they call up one day and say, hey, we had 100 units that was in the contract. We want 50 of those units and we want them in 3 days. Well, how does he do that? He either has to have already had them manufactured and held as finished goods in inventory, which is expensive. Which means because he's also had to buy all the raw materials, and as well as the inventory holding. He may not have the raw materials and he may have to source the raw materials. So how does he make sure he sources raw materials in a really short time frame? Does he have the human capital and the human resources available to produce at a high volume for that product? And then what's he going to do to ship it so fast, right? All of those things have operational implications, and that just are crazy. And so the thing that was frustrating is that we were talking about this particular contract situation is that as soon as we went back and said, no, we're not going to do that, this big company even removed that language immediately. And of course they did, because they know it's ridiculous. The problem is that language is there because some small businesses are accepting it without fighting for it, without trying to renegotiate that clause. And so that's really, for me, that's very frustrating. But for him, he was able to get that language removed. But so that is operations. That's a time because the customer was trying to renegotiate their contract. And that's a time when operations can drive the rationale for renegotiation. The fourth thing is strategy. So I look to software companies as examples here because software companies have strategic roadmaps. So that is the timeline over which they are going to release new benefits and features to their software product. So sometimes customers will come to you and say, that's all great and awesome, but that thing that you have on your roadmap in 18 months, I need it this quarter. Right? So if I'm going to move that thing that far ahead in development, I have a lot of things to think about because that's a strategic change. One of the things I have to think about is how does the acceleration of that feature or benefit impact the rest of my roadmap over the next 3 to 5 years? Right? So I have to think about that. I have to think about resource loading. Do I have the available resources? Do I have to enter into new agreements with partners or suppliers in order to be able to produce this particular feature? Do I need underlying software that's going to help to drive it? And so do I need to go and secure those new deals? Because I may not have them right now. And how does it affect, how am I going to price it? Since I wasn't even thinking about the pricing of it today, and it was 18 months down the road, I had time to think about how I was going to get compensated for that. How do I wrap that into my existing pricing? So that is an example of a strategic rationale driving the need to renegotiate. So we have cash flow, we have profitability, we have operations, and we have strategy. And the fifth one, you notice anything about those four? Those four things are all business related. And the fifth rationale is legal. 80% of the risk components in your contracts, formal and informal, is business related, not legally related. Now, we're headquartered in California. So California legislature passed a law called AB 5 earlier in 2020, which makes gig employees actual full-time employees instead of contract employees. And it's caused quite the stir, and it has caused many companies to have to initiate renegotiation in order to be compliant with that legislation. But out of all 5 of those, only one thing is legal. Most small business owners and entrepreneurs think that contracts are legal documents. They're not legal documents. They have legal elements in them. So they have language in it that is aligned with the law passed by legislatures. But a contract is a document between you and your counterpart for how your business together is going to unfold over time. I actually kind of have started saying, after being on Shay's show, that contracts are documents of hope, because that's what they are. We go into these relationships with the hope that we put this thing together and it's going to generate mutual benefit over a period of time, for a long time in the future. So contracts are documents of hope for that reason, because they are all about that fact that we hope that the assumptions that we use to build the relationship will continue to carry the relationship forward. But the thing is that hope doesn't always play out the way we plan it to. The visions that we have for the future don't always unfold in the way we anticipate, which is why these 5 elements drive renegotiation. So when we enter into that hopeful contract, that hope for the future, we hope that none of these 5 things are going to cause us to need to renegotiate, but sometimes they do. And certainly today, in today's environment, we are seeing renegotiation across the board. We are seeing it with commercial leases. We're seeing it with supply chain and suppliers across the board. We're seeing customers who are in trouble and trying to renegotiate. And so once now you know the rationale behind asking for renegotiation and how to drive the renegotiation along one of these 5 different rationales. Now you have to know how to ask, because that's the second most important thing, because that's the part that people have the hardest time doing, especially entrepreneurs and small business owners. For some reason, we're taught that a contract is a contract is a contract, a word is a bond, and that's all true. However, it does not mean that you are not allowed to renegotiate. I have somebody here in downtown Los Angeles who owns a restaurant, and it's an incredible restaurant. It's incredibly well reviewed. It's internationally reviewed, and she has a lease. But COVID wiped away their business, and instead of really renegotiating their lease, they're still paying for that space, even though they've had to move out of that space to something much smaller in order to be able to support their business. But they still have that lease on their books, and they're still on the hook for it instead of renegotiating for it. And I hate seeing that. But because the thing is that if we one of the big steps of any negotiation is the negotiation we have between our ears, where we're convincing ourselves what's possible and what's not possible. So you have to be willing to ask. But how you ask in a renegotiation matters, because going back to what I said earlier, just because you need to renegotiate and the deal isn't working for you does not mean it's not working for your counterpart, right? So we've come up with the rationale for why we're going to ask for a renegotiation. So now you need to think about how you're going to ask. So we break down the how you ask into this component of communication attributes and negotiation styles. So there are 2 primary communication attributes. One is traditional and one is modern. So a traditional communicator tends to do things, more traditionally. So they tend to like emails. They tend to like meeting in person when preferred. That's their absolute preference. They tend to have longer, deeper relationships. They tend to be more structured and have more organization around the things that they're doing. They like to have, everybody in the loop. They like order, and they're not particularly excited about the concept of risk. And so they like to be communicated in emails and meetings. They like, paragraphs and PowerPoints, and they just like a more formal structure of communication. A modern person, in case you couldn't figure out, is the opposite, right? So they don't like any of that. As a general, they're kind of okay with risk. They make decisions more on intuition, but whether intuition is based on either having a broad level of experiences or a really deep knowledge in a subject matter. They tend to like abbreviated communication. They do not like being in meetings if there is no actionable outcome or no decisions are made. That drives them absolutely crazy. They prefer text. They like, and if you're going to email them, please bullet point email to them, because they are not going to sit and read 5 paragraphs of information. They just get to the point. And PowerPoints really don't do much for them. They find them to be too wordy sometimes, and that they don't add a lot of value. So one of the reasons why it's important to understand the communication attribute, not only your communication attribute, but your counterparts, is it is the first and easiest place to create goodwill. And in negotiation, it's generally better to build little wins at the very beginning, and how you communicate with somebody is one of the easiest things that you can build a win on. And so that's where these communication attributes come into play. Now, each of these communication attributes applies to all of the 4 negotiation styles. So what are the 4 negotiation styles? So the first style is a champion. Now, it's not the champion that you're thinking about with the Comeback Champion Summit. So it's a different kind of a champion. So in negotiation, the champion is the person who likes to win at all costs. They see negotiation, or they tend to see negotiation, as a battle, and they go into it fully armed and fully armored. And their whole purpose is to beat down their opponent. And they see their counterpart as an opponent. And we all know this negotiation style. In fact, we've all used this negotiation style at times, but it may not be your default. So all of us use all 4 of these styles, but we tend to default to one more than the other. So champions can be very aggressive in their negotiation style, but they are excellent at kind of the haggling aspect of a negotiation. If you have one thing that you're trying to negotiate for, and you don't have any intention of having a long-term relationship with somebody, then the champion is the person you want to do that haggling for you. They are incredible at that, because they focus on one issue at a time, and they are not concerned about anything to do with the other party except for beating them. So they are incredible at driving price down to the lowest possible thing, but at what cost? And we'll come back to that, because one of the big challenges for a champion is that because they see the negotiation as a battle, they tend to have a challenge when it comes to maintaining longer term relationships. That can be a problem for them if they are needing to renegotiate something, because if they're the one needing to seek a renegotiation, their counterpart may not be inclined to provide them support to help make that happen. And so that's something that, if you are a champion, that you need to kind of think about. The second style is a maverick. Now, a maverick and a champion have a few similarities, but the biggest difference between the two is that a maverick doesn't look at their counterpart necessarily as somebody to annihilate. They're just not concerned about you as a counterpart. They are definitely concerned about their wins and losses. I consider mavericks to be my checklist negotiators. And by the way, there are about 10% of negotiators are champions, about 55% of negotiators are mavericks. So mavericks are kind of the checklist negotiator. They have a list of 10 things that they want to get out of the negotiation. They negotiate point one, got it. Point two, got it. Point three, got it. Point four, nope, didn't get that one. 5, yes. 6, yes. 7, yes. 8, yes. 9, nope, didn't get 9. And 10, yes. All right, yes, I got an 80% on that negotiation test. That's kind of the mentality, because they look at that one point, and once they've agreed, somebody's agreed to it, they move to the second without thinking about the first one again. So the challenge with that, though, is that all those 8 things that maverick negotiator won may have nowhere near as much value and importance as the 2 things they lost, because the combination of the 2 things they lost may have yielded far more benefit than all 8 of the things that they got combined. So one of the challenges that the maverick has is that because they tend to look at each thing item by item, and in negotiation we call that positional negotiating. So when they look at those individual things, they're missing the opportunity to create more value. They're leaving money on the table, either actual dollars on the table, or they're leaving benefits that could translate into money for them in the future. And they also can get very stuck on a point. And when they're not winning their point, they can sometimes get a little bit agitated about it. And they also have to take care with respect to the quality of their relationships. So if you are a maverick, as 55% of you statistically are on this call, take stock of the quality of your relationships and where your relationship stands today before you seek a renegotiation, because you may need to do a little relationship repair there. And if you do, then I might suggest that you look to the third style, which is a benefactor. And a benefactor cares about relationship. That is, they will agree to things that are not necessarily in their best interest because they think they have to in order to preserve the relationship. Now, this sounds like kind of a 2-headed snake, and it kind of is, or a 2-headed coin, and it kind of is, because the benefactor tends to be very conflict avoidant. So as a result of that conflict avoidance, they may agree to things that they actually can't deliver on, which at the end of the day has the effect that they are trying most to avoid at the front end of the negotiation, and that is that they over promise and under deliver, and that can hurt the relationship in the long term. But initially, they are incredible at building and smoothing ruffled feathers. So if you are a champion or a maverick and you need to seek a renegotiation with a counterpart and the relationship is in tatters, I would strongly encourage you to find a benefactor who can help you to build that relationship up, as long as that person's not giving away things that you cannot deliver. But having a benefactor on your side to repair your relationships can be really, really beneficial. And the fourth style is an ambassador. Now, an ambassador, very different from the maverick, in that the ambassador, you know how I said the maverick goes through that checklist and they negotiate a point and then check, it's done, and they move to the second one. The ambassador is the negotiation style that looks at all 10 of those things and says, okay, all 10 of that is one thing. If I move this piece, what does that do to the remaining 9? If I put that back in and I move number 4 out, what does that do? Okay, what's the value look like there? If and what's the combination of those 10 things that creates the greatest amount of value and benefit for both parties? Because the ambassador, just like the word sounds, is all about figuring out a joint decision. What is a mutually beneficial outcome that they can collaboratively get to together? And so they're all about joint problem solving and trying to make the pie bigger. One of the frustrations with ambassadors is that they can take really long to negotiate, and they can turn things that are non-issues, that are super simple, into things that are really complex, because they like to think of things as always having some interrelated aspect, when sometimes it's just A or B, and there's no A plus A minus, B plus B. There's not 6 things in it. It's literally just 2 things. But the ambassador sometimes will try to make it look like that there are 6 choices when there's just 2. The other thing that the ambassador can do sometimes is, if they're encountering a champion who's really aggressive and really strong in their position, they also can become conflict avoidant. And so that's something as an ambassador to also be aware of. So knowing your style is really important, because it drives how you communicate. So knowing your communication attribute and whether or not that meshes or contradicts your counterparts will help you determine what you're good, building, whether you can build goodwill quickly after engaging in that discussion. And then your styles are important, because you need to know what your strengths and your weaknesses are in terms of how you're communicating, and how that's going to look from a negotiation position. Because if you're a champion and you're coming in and you're a benefactor and you're negotiating with a champion, you're likely going to have an issue, and you may need a third party to come in and help you figure that out. So now you know what the rationales are around a renegotiation, and you know kind of the how to ask, which is the important part. Now the next thing is to engage and listen with intent, right? So you've figured out what you're asking for, why you're asking for it, how you're going to ask. Now you just have to ask, and you have to follow through, but you have to listen, because again, like I said earlier, the negotiation, a renegotiation, you may need it, but your counterpart may not. And so you're listening for clues to figure out how your rationale can be tailored to meet the needs of your counterpart, so that you both walk away with, if it's less than what it was, that at least it's still a mutually beneficial situation, right? So that's really important. And I do an exercise in our workshop, so because we have a bunch of workshops that we do. And so specifically, I do it in my negotiation mastery class. But one of the things we do is I put people in small groups, and the person asks a question, and then the person who asks the question cannot say anything for 30 seconds. And I would challenge you to do that in your home. Like, figure out a good open-ended question. So not a close-ended question is a yes/no question. So not close-ended, but an open-ended question of how or what, something like that. A how is a good question to do it with. And then just say nothing. And it's really hard for people. It very quickly, some people are like leaning in really far, going, wait, I need to say something. I got to say that. You see people's mouths starting to move, but their words aren't coming out because they're checking themselves, going, the timer hasn't gone off yet. And so it's really important, because that listening aspect is where you know what you need and want in the renegotiation. But your time once you've positioned the need to renegotiate with your counterpart, all you have are guesses about what your counterpart needs and wants. But your counterpart is going to give you clues if you just listen with intent, because you want to be able to focus on the facts to get to the renegotiation, because you want to be able to get them to agree to the assumptions that drive the facts. Because once you agree to those things, then agreeing to numbers at the end of the negotiation are just not that big of a deal, because you've already come to agreements on the whole part. And the other piece is that document it. Once you've gotten to an agreement with your counterpart, once you've renegotiated and reached a new agreement with your counterpart, document it. Now, document it either in a detailed email or in a contract. And the reason why I say this is because one of the big challenges is with a renegotiation, if it's not documented, people will go back to the first agreement and say, oh, well, we said this. Well, we renegotiated that. Well, I don't have any proof that we renegotiated it. And that could be because people changed and the people you had originally renegotiated it with don't exist in the organization anymore, whatever the reason is. But you want to write it down. You want to have evidence that you actually did reach agreement on a renegotiated deal. And the other thing you want to do is you want to pay very close attention, because if something happens and you can't live up to that renegotiated agreement, you better be on the phone ASAP with your counterpart to let them know that it's still not working and that you need to do something else. Now, does renegotiation work 100% of the time? Absolutely not. And the better your relationship is with your counterpart, the more likely you are to have a successful renegotiation event. If you have a lot of animosity, you've not treated your counterpart well in the past, either personally or professionally, this is the point in time when it's going to come and bite you in the backside, because it's going to make it harder for somebody to want to help you be successful. So this is, and the thing is that one of the reasons why renegotiation is so important and something for you to think about is, if you believe in a customer for a lifetime, then you should have renegotiation as part of your standard process, because you will have to renegotiate the terms of that agreement over time if you believe in a customer for a lifetime, because things change all the time, right? Things change all the time. So why is it that I do this, right? Why do I talk about renegotiation? Why do I have an organization that's just passionate about helping small businesses and entrepreneurs level the playing field? Why do I have programs to help you guys do that? Well, I do it because, remember that story I was telling you earlier when we were talking about profitability? Well, recently, about, a few months ago, I reached out to the CEO of that company, and I hadn't talked to him in quite a long time. And he said something to me that really hit me hard, because it's absolutely what drives me to do this. And he said, Christine, not only did you help our company survive, you helped us thrive. And they ultimately, 7 years after we renegotiated that contract, they sold to a Fortune 1000 company for $123 million. So they went from the verge of bankruptcy with 20 employees to selling 7 years later for $123 million. Through the work that I did and my team did, we helped keep a company afloat. We helped them grow. We helped them hire more people and service more customers. And that is super exciting for me, to be able to to know that renegotiation and negotiation can have that big of an impact on a company is just mind-blowing to me. So if you want to learn more about me and my organization, I would love for you to text Venn Zone, VENNZONE, all one word, Venn Zone, to 26786. And you will be able to get our 7 elements of successful negotiation. You'll be able to take our quiz to learn your default negotiation style, and you'll be able to delve in more and to renegotiate that. So again, text Venn Zone, VENNZONE, all one word, to 26786 to delve deeper into Renegotiate That, to learn the 7 elements of successful negotiation, and to learn your default negotiation style. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shay Brown. Thank you to each of you for staying and hanging out with me. And I hope you have an awesome day. Cheers.